All right, y'all. This is a new SEC podcast, episode 5. We got a new episode for you. The boys out there in the Southeast have played over 30 games. So we're going to go over power rankings. We're going to give you some game recaps and just our overall thoughts on different team situations. Tennessee looks beastie. Arkansas looks like they got some potential. Alabama, the bar is set so high. So what do we think about that performance despite the 28-point explosion in the fourth quarter? And of course, we're going to talk about a preview for the following episode as well. So you stay tuned here for a great one. We're excited to talk to you guys. And, as always, like, follow, subscribe, and feel free to comment in terms of what you want to hear and see here at the new SEC podcast. But I'm Randall Ledet Jr.
I'm Hunter Ziesman.
And this is the new SEC podcast. So, Hunter, man, talk to me about your Saturday. What were the feelings? Every Saturday feels different.
It does, man. Saturday felt good. It's never, when Alabama's playing at night, for me, I'm always looking forward to the Alabama game. There's good football in between, but I was waiting and waiting. I wanted to see a good USF game, better than last year. And so I was looking forward to that. But Saturday felt good being able to watch Texas, watch Arkansas and, settle into the evening. But I was excited. A lot of the teams played well, even the ones that lost. So it was a good Saturday for the SEC.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good Saturday. And I know that feeling, right? Like when your team plays in the evening, like you said, you're looking forward to watching all the games, but you're ready for your team to show out and represent and, confirm what spot they're at or prove people wrong and get to a higher spot. You get an opportunity to see other teams lose, right? Like, obviously we want the whole SEC to do well, but we have our teams and you have your team. But, ultimately it's like, you're ready for that game to come on and you're like, okay, what are we going to do? And, for me, this was a unique SEC Saturday. I obviously care about the conference, but, my alma mater, Houston, was playing Oklahoma. So got to see a brand new SEC team play a relatively new Big 12 team in Houston. And there was a lot to take away. One thing that stood out to me was right off the gate, Texas put their foot on the gas. That wasn't a game. But if you had multiple screens set up or you have YouTube TV, you got an opportunity to watch Arkansas versus Oklahoma State. And that showed me a lot about Arkansas. So that was one of my kind of key takeaways, and we'll dive deeper here in the episode.
Yeah, no, that's a good point to bring up. I mean, when we looked at the first episode, we were talking about schedules, and a lot of the teams that we were curious in marking games on their calendar, a lot of them play Arkansas. So now we can revisit that and see like, oh, this is an Arkansas team that can score, 30, 40, 50 points. So it's fun to see a team like that be, even though they lost, be really competitive and show some teams things that they haven't seen. So yeah, it was a good Saturday.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a good Saturday. So we were excited to put together our power rankings for people that may have not seen or heard of power rankings. It's not just the standings from top to bottom, 1 through 16. It's typically a combination of the eye test, who they've played against, and the strength of schedule, as well as separation of victory. Right? Are teams blowing other teams out? Have they played a Power 4 opponent? Are they playing a top conference champion potentially from a Group of 5 conference, or a top conference runner-up like Oklahoma State for Arkansas? And then just looking at how they look on all sides of the ball, right? Offense, defense. Are they making mistakes? We saw Alabama had a lot of penalties in the game, and I think last year they averaged about 8 penalties a game. But nonetheless, it's a combination of a few different factors that we put together. And what makes these things fun is that they're always ever changing. And what makes it even more fun is that if you look at the top 25, there's 9 SEC teams once again. And in terms of the top 7, 6 of them are SEC schools. So when they say it just means more, it clearly means a lot.
Yep. Yeah, no, the top of the SEC is strong. And even some of those that trickle in later, like I would still put against the top in the ACC, the top in the Big 10, top in the Big 12. So it is deep. It is deep. And, win or lose the games, there's some strong teams in the SEC that, I almost wish that they got to play more out of conference games. Like I wish I got to see Texas play, Ohio State or something during the regular season too, after that performance. But looking forward to hearing your power rankings.
Likewise. And I agree with you, right? I wish the season can only be so long, but I would love to see more of these out of conference matchups. If they could like seed it where it's like, the one team from last year plays the one team from, this season, that would be great. But we got to see what we got to see. And it was kicked off with a top 10 matchup with Texas and Michigan. And although it didn't look like that in terms of the game on the field and the scoreboard, it was top 10. Michigan's supposed to be the second or third biggest dog in the Big Ten, and they won the national championship last year, but Texas took it to them. So that kind of led to this debate for some people where does Texas deserve the number one spot? If you look at our power rankings, specifically yours, Hunter, man, talk to me about how you did yours and what you were thinking across it.
Yeah, so I kind of laid mine out in a tier list. It's kind of tough for me to pick, between a couple teams. So I tiered them based on where I think of them as a team through 2 weeks. And like you mentioned, this is ever changing, but more so based on the eye test and how they look. And really, if I was another team, how I would want to play them. So you have your tier ones, and those are the playoff bound teams, right? The usual suspects right now after 3 weeks. And Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee are in here for really one reason, is that they put up pretty stellar performances against a Power 4 opponent. Georgia with Clemson, Texas with Michigan, and Tennessee versus NC State this past weekend. So not much more to say on those guys. We know what they can do. I think all of them have a great shot at the playoffs this year. Tier 2, we still need to see something from them. They needed to do a Power 4 matchup. We're going to see that from a lot of these teams, coming up. Ole Miss is a little bit further, but Alabama with Wisconsin, Missouri, has BC next week. Once we see what they can do against better competition, we'll have a better feel for, do they belong up a tier? Do they belong down a tier? Or are they just right?
So let me pause you here real quick. So I think you mentioned Alabama has Wisconsin and Missouri has BC next week. Say both those teams win. What do you think it would take to add them to that top 3 tier, or do they just make the move and be the 4th or 5th team in that tier?
Yeah, that's a good point, or a good question there. Like, I think from Alabama, what I need to see is a little bit more consistency, right? Like consistency on the offense. And then when they're playing Wisconsin, we need to see a good defensive performance. So they're going to have Georgia right after that too, after the bye week. So if they can put on a convincing performance, we saw from Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee, not a win, we saw a convincing performance.
Yep.
So for them to be able to jump that, I need to see something convincing. Missouri against BC, I think that is a little bit less convincing than what some of these teams have coming up.
Yeah.
Alabama versus Georgia would be the big one for them to be able to jump a couple teams there.
Yeah, and that's what's great about the schedule this year, especially with no divisions. We get to see Alabama versus Georgia. When we look at my power rankings and as we kind of talk through this, a lot of these teams that are in that tier 3 or tier 2 play tier 1 schools, right? And so Alabama plays Tennessee, so they have an opportunity to leapfrog them. Alabama has games in between that third Saturday in October to show more game control, to show more consistency on offense. To get back to tier 1 and the tier that we've come to know them to be in.
Yeah, definitely. I just need to see it from them on the field under new coaching. Like it's, almost guilty until proven innocent at that point. But the rest of these teams follow in, we have Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, and Arkansas. I have them here listed as high ceiling tier 3 teams. They have tools to be a good team. I never thought I would put Vanderbilt here, but the way that offense can fire, they can confuse a lot of teams on the field. They're tough to deal with without the proper athleticism. Arkansas could have been up one. They really could have, but they shot themselves in the foot, and we'll dig into that more later. But these teams have high ceilings. They have a high caliber of players on both sides of the ball. Tier 4, the question here is, can they put it all together? It's similar to, the Oklahoma and Arkansas, where they didn't put the best performance, well-rounded performance, but there's more glaring holes there. With LSU, it was finishing in the red zone. With Auburn, it was consistency and offense against Cal. We saw the turnover mistakes.
Yeah.
With South Carolina, I think there's an offensive question. Against Kentucky, they were set up for success because they were on the field constantly. Kentucky couldn't stay on the field, so South Carolina had more and more opportunities with positive field position to make things happen. So can they put it all together? I think that these are kind of the division in the conference, right? The teams 4 and up can compete. The ones below, I think, are going to have a tougher road, and we can dig into those more too.
And I like your tier 4 a lot because all 3 teams have played a Power 4 opponent, right? Yeah. When I'm thinking about the top 2 criteria when it comes to power rankings, it's got to be who they're playing against, who those teams have played against, how they've looked in their games. And obviously, USC looked impressive against Utah State. Their defense looked impressive against LSU. Their offense looked impressive. And LSU was, for all intents and purposes, kind of controlling that game, right? You look at Auburn we have to respect the offensive weapons there. It was not a great performance. We can dig into that later. It was an abysmal performance, to be honest. But when you look at South Carolina, you see the defenses there. You see what Dylan Stewart can do. And they're the first ones to take that at bat against an SEC school. So I like this tier 4. I do agree with you. They do all have an opportunity to kind of make that leap. And what's also fun is that LSU and South Carolina play this Saturday.
Yeah,
And College game day will be there. So we don't have to. It's not going to be all hypotheticals because it's going to play out in real life.
Yeah, and a lot of these teams, I mean, it's the SEC, they're all going to be mix and matching. We're going to get to see a lot of these matchups play out and not just theoretical, like you said. The next 4, the last 4 here, rounding it out, could really go differently. Mississippi State and Texas A&M, I have them long road ahead. I don't know if that's fully accurate. The schedules for these two give them a lot of opportunities for a win. More so, they have a lot of things to build upon to be at that point where we feel comfortable saying that they have a good offense or they have a good, well-rounded defense. I think A&M, we can say that for the defense. Mississippi State, we saw the fight at the end of the Arizona State game to try to get back in it. They have those pieces, but there's still a long road ahead from a comfortability standpoint, from a leadership standpoint there, those teams to say that they could do it early.
Right.
I don't think that they're fully struggling. Yeah.
No, and I agree, right? Arizona State slashed up Mississippi State those first 3 quarters. I think they had over like 200, 250 yards. If you subscribed or listened to the last video, Arizona State fans, you could have it. They cooked, but you got to I'm sure if you had your money on the spread, you're a little bit worried there at the end. This Mississippi State was fighting back, and that's the fight that we didn't see last year with Zach Arnett, right? We saw it with Mike Leach, but you put the defense together. The offense got hot at kind of the wrong time, or at the right time, but not with enough time. And so I agree. And with A&M, it's you played McNeese State, you understand what type of game that is, but there is this, you get credit for hanging around with Notre Dame. That win, that loss might not carry as much weight going forward, but that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are really good points. And we can see a lot more from these teams in the future. Like there's an opportunity for these teams to improve. There's an opportunity for every team to improve. They have the leadership from the coaching standpoint to be able to do it. It's just putting that into the players on the field. The last tier, I know there's some recency bias here for Kentucky because I came into the season thinking Kentucky was going to be solid, but they looked rough, very rough. One of the worst offensive performances I can recall recently, 3 for 30 or 3 for 10 for 30 yards. Like that's not good from a quarterback that you were expecting to be able to lead this team that has a strong defense. So putting them down, they're going to need to show me something drastically different with their O-line before I can put them any higher. Florida, week 1 was rough. They played, Samford. DJ Lagway could elevate this team. I think if they ever elevated out of this tier, it would be behind him over Graham Mertz. Next week, they have a lot of questions around that. Who do you start? DJ Lagway looked great. So do you put him in instead of Mertz for, their upcoming game?
Absolutely. And I was listening to Andy Staples today, actually, and he's a Florida alum. He had walked on at one point, and he was like, hey, you got to run with Lagway, right? Like, big time columnist. You know what you're going to get with Mertz. And with Lagway, he led the SEC last week with yards. So again, it's Samford, but first game out the gate at the Division I level, he brings some excitement. I think he went like 24 for 29. I mean, like you might as well. So that's your power rankings, huh? So
that's it. Let's flip over to yours. I know there's a couple differences. We have the same usual suspects up top, but break it down for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had Georgia at 1. I feel like Clemson is a better opponent compared to Michigan, so I had to give them a nod in terms of over Texas. I think Texas's game control has been very impressive. I'm really excited for that game in October that's taking place in Austin. I put Ole Miss at 3. The Ole Miss's receiver Trey Harris leads the SEC in yards. Jackson Dart has been very impressive. I think he's had about like 8 or 9 touchdowns. He had 6 in week 1. The knock for them is going to be their schedule, right? You played Furman week 1. You played Middle Tennessee State week 2. You play Wake Forest this week, who is all intents purposes, lower SEC. I think or lower ACC. They're 1-1, but I'm impressed with their game control. I'm impressed with what they bring back, and I feel like I'm more familiar with Jackson Dart can do over a whole season compared to what Nico can do in 2 games. Nico being the quarterback for Tennessee, I have them at 4. I mean, that team outscored NC State, who's supposed to be a ranked team, 41-14 over 3 quarters between the second and the fourth quarter, right? Just absolute domination. There was some questions in terms of protecting the ball. Nico did throw an interception, but that defense is extremely stout. Dylan Sampson is the best running back in the SEC until I see otherwise. Trevor Etienne, you have time to potentially reclaim your throne, but Dylan Sampson leads the SEC in yards. So that would be my 1 through 4. I would say if I had to tier them, I think 1 through 5, which includes Bama, are playoff bound. And that would match with what I had in my original playoff projections. We can pull it up if it makes sense. But Bama, they are kind of at the mercy of their expectations. They're at the mercy of what Saban has put out there. And we understand it's not the Saban era, but, pardoning a field goal in the fourth quarter, they were only up 1 point on USF at home. Western Kentucky, the knock was just expecting to see more on offense, but in that USF game, and USF is a respectable opponent, but there are many people on USF who would not get offers to Alabama, right? But I need to see more from them consistently throughout the game to kind of be in that 1 through 4. They have the opportunity to play Georgia, to play Texas, or to play Georgia, to play Tennessee, to get those spots back in upcoming weeks. But, I'm not even knocking Jalen Milroe in terms of the fumble. That was clearly a snap issue. But, what I am unimpressed by and what I'd like to see more from is just consistency on the offense to put them in that tier of 1 through 4 who have been dominating. Any thoughts thus far from what you've seen or what you heard?
No, yeah, I think you're pretty spot on. We only have the difference there with Ole Miss and Tennessee. You mentioned the best running back in the SEC. Some people think Jalen Milroe is the best running back in the SEC. No, I got jokes. No, I think it's spot on. I think maybe some of the questions are around a little bit after this, but I like where you have everybody so far.
This is where it gets fun, right? There's some teams, like we said, have played Power 4 opponents. Some teams that have had, we'll say, quote unquote, quality losses. And Missouri is that team that is. This should be fresh and reset just from this season. There is the carryover from last season, similar to Ole Miss, because you return Brady Cook, you return Luther Burden, you return Theo Weiss at receiver, and you haven't given up a point all season. Buffalo is obviously a mid-tier MAC opponent, and they played Murray State week 1, but just absolute game control. Very impressed from what I'm seeing in the air. LSU gets the spot at 7. They're 2-0. And not every record is coinciding. 1-1. They're 1-1. You're right. Not every record is necessarily coinciding with the standings, but hear me out. I believe that Garrett Nussmeier is a more consistent quarterback than some of the quarterback play that I see underneath thus far in 2 games. It's Nicholls State and it's USC, but we saw an improved USC defense. Garrett Nussmeier kept them in the game and did not lose in the game, so I'm very impressed with him. The challenges are going to come at the running back position, losing your starting running back the previous week. And number 8 is a team I'm really excited about, of course, is Arkansas. Woo Pig Sooie Nation, loved the pick last week, but Taylor Green is top 10 in a good amount of quarterback stats, including, passer rating in the SEC as well as yards. But more importantly, this team was able to go toe-to-toe with the Big 12 runner-ups last week on the road. They had a 2-score lead early on, right? An interception completely changed the dynamic of that game that Oklahoma State was able to take back. So I have them at 8. I think they could definitely give a game with LSU, which is a game for a trophy. It's a huge rivalry game. They could give Missouri a game and they could give Alabama a game. I honestly do believe that. The 9 through 16, it's kind of a hodgepodge, right? If you look, South Carolina's played Kentucky. So like you said, Hunter, I think we're kind of the expectations of Kentucky and the expectations of South Carolina have probably played a role in me putting Kentucky at 14 and South Carolina at 12 because I thought very highly of Kentucky. I was more not as expecting as much from South Carolina. And when you take those two expectations together, and you just see domination from a new starting quarterback compared to a starting quarterback coming from Georgia, starting quarterback that has an all AAC wide receiver in Jamori Macklin, SEC top receiver in Barry and Brown, and Dane Key, who's also really impressive. I expect more, and we understand the O-line is a challenge, but that was the only gap that showed up to me that game that I wasn't expecting. The defense is supposed to be solid, but when they're on the field that much, it's tough. So, I put South Carolina at 12. Some people might not agree with A&M at 11. Obviously, they're 1-1. The team they lost to just lost to Northern Illinois. So I'm open to scrutiny there. But when I look at A&M, I'm looking at the talent they have. I'm looking at the game control that I saw, and they kept it close with Notre Dame. They were in it for the majority of the game, and then they of course took care of business. And then at the 10 spot, I have Oklahoma, and I have them behind Vanderbilt, despite being 2-0, because I went to University of Houston, right? And Houston played UNLV week 1. They got absolutely dominated. The score was 27-7, but they scored in garbage time in the fourth quarter with their backup quarterback, their third string quarterback, mind you, against UNLV. UNLV was able to score 27 points on Houston, and Oklahoma was able to score 16. 14 if you don't count the safety. 14 points is not going to win you games in the SEC. Every team that I have above Oklahoma, I think could give them a game if they're only gonna focus mostly on defense. And I look, week 1, I was hot on Deion Burks. I was very hot on Jackson Arnold. I no doubt in my mind they could get back up to that level. They play a lot of these schools. I think they play Georgia this year. They're going to play Texas this year, obviously. And they're going to play Tennessee in 2 weeks. So they have the opportunity to show us what they have, but I respect their out of conference schedule with Temple, Houston, and Tulane. You saw Tulane gave Kansas State a game this past week if you watched other conferences, but I don't know if it's enough to put them over Vanderbilt, who's 2-0 and who has played a top ACC contender and won, took care of business, finished the game. What I would have liked to see from a Arkansas from an overtime win. And so that kind of rounds out my 1 through 12 so yeah.
Yeah. I think that was my one question, and you expanded on it well with Oklahoma there. I would think that they would maybe a little bit higher just from the defensive side of the ball, that they do have such a stout defense. But again, they are playing, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, Alabama, Missouri. Like, they're playing a lot of these teams. So,
they're playing high-powered offenses. Those, like, it's not like, and not that Bama's ever really had a bad offense. I mean, you go through AJ McCarron and Mac Jones and Tua, and Georgia's had offensive. They might not have been as strong offensively prior to Stetson Bennett, and Aaron Murray was good, but like, all these teams have good offenses. We're not in a this is a defense only. All these teams have good offenses. So that's where I need to see more from Oklahoma if your two opponents are Temple and Houston to this point. They make these stops against Tennessee. If they slow down Nico in 2 weeks, they'll probably be top 8. You beat Nico in 2 weeks, you'll probably be top 8 at worst, right?
Yeah.
And because you saw Tennessee made a jump 7 spots to the top 10 in the rankings, AP. So the opportunity is there. I just need to see it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I hear where you're coming from. Now, I mean, 14, 15, 16 are kind of the ones that we both know they're at the bottom, but I think, Auburn at 13 after that loss, that's a big drop from where I think we were looking at them in the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and for me, it is a big drop. And Cal may be better than we anticipated, going off of their performance the first week against UC Davis, 31-13. Not really super impressed with Fernando at quarterback there, but when you turn the ball over 5 times, and you give up an interception for a touchdown, it leads me to be concerned about what you're going to do against SEC defenses. I think out of 13 through 16, Auburn probably has the most potential to excel on the offensive level. Like, Cam Coleman's great. And I always forget his name, but Keandre Lambert, senior receiver, he's incredible, right? He's had 2 touchdowns over the last couple games. But I got to see it put all together. The defense held their own. They slowed down Jay Knott. I think you had mentioned it. We had talked about it. I think he had like 11 carries for 10 yards. The running game was less than 100 yards for Cal, but I just need to see more to give them the nod over South Carolina just based upon the two games. You could argue that they should be higher than A&M. I would give you that. You could argue that. I can't put them over Vanderbilt, and I can't put them over OU with both 2-0 at this time with respectable power, a power 4 win, like respectable. Not they have a power. Both those teams have a power 4 win. So that's why I have Auburn there. That's no shade to Auburn. If it feels like it, put some sunglasses on, but
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you.
Anything on Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Florida? Like any, reason one is higher than the other here?
Yeah, I mean, if there's no numerical number that you have to have for your tier list, right? If I could put 4 people in tier 1 or 3 teams in tier 2, I would put Kentucky in the can they put it all together. It would be fringe, but I think they have the pieces to compete. Like, I still believe in this defense. I know they have the weapons on the outside. It could just take some time to get Brock Vandagriff warmed up and ready. I have a hard time believing that he cannot be the guy. And I'm okay and willing to be proven wrong, but he had a great performance the week before with 2 touchdowns, and you saw a lot on the ground. I think I would just need to see more from Kentucky on the offensive side, but I would put them in that can they put it all together bucket. From a high ceiling bucket, our teams are pretty similar, right? I think you had Arkansas, Vanderbilt, OU, and if you look at my 8, 9, 10, it's about the same. LSU is probably higher on my side than yours, but I'm just a believer. I'm a believer. I'm a believer in LSU, so I got them a little bit higher there. They have played the toughest test besides maybe Vanderbilt on that list between 7 and 10 when it comes to opponents.
I hear you. Yeah. I think that kind of rounds it out. We talked a little bit about Florida and Mississippi State. These rankings are ever changing. A lot of these teams are going to start to play each other, like we mentioned. So there will be a lot of opportunity for ones to jump, shift, drop in some cases, right? So we'll see. But wanted to run through that and get some thoughts there. Any last thoughts before we move on from the power rankings here?
No last thoughts here, or at least not a lot. Had a great time putting this together. I think that it's interesting to see Alabama at the 5 spot. And, I think we kind of saw them at a similar spot last year, trying to kind of prove who they were and coming off of having Bryce Young at quarterback. I think Missouri's going to be in a similar spot throughout the season, kind of hawking down some of these other teams because they don't have that same schedule, but they do have the benefit of playing Alabama, which could serve as a marquee win, could serve as a good close loss to kind of put them in that tier. Ole Miss just needs to play someone.
Yeah, they'll get there. They'll get there.
They don't play LSU till week 7, but those are a couple of my thoughts.
Yeah,
but so I'm overall, I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, I feel good where they're at. I know there's some differences, so I'm sure we'll hear some different opinions, and happy to hear anyone out on if they think their team should be higher or their rival team should be lower.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So we talked about a lot of these teams in light, about week 2 and what we saw from them. Some of the bigger games, diving deeper, we mentioned Alabama as one of those that was kind of setting them back from that tier 1. And it was a sloppy performance against USF. It was pretty reminiscent of the game last year. They had 13 penalties, which is never good. A ton of those on the offensive line. Overall horrible offensive line performance, 3 fumbles. It was a bad game from Alabama, but if you just looked at the score after the game, you saw 42-16, and you might not have known it.
Yeah. And like you said, right, it's number 5 in our power rankings puts you at number 4 in the AP. If you looked at the box score, like you said, you wouldn't know it was a close game. And I just did a little bit of research, and 9 penalties in the first half. I think they had over like 12 or 13 penalties in the game. Under the Saban last year, they averaged 8 penalties a game, which is still on the higher end, but not 9 1/2, right? So where they really kind of found themselves in this close game is really a lot of mistakes on their end. And you got to give credit to USF for creating those opportunities for those mistakes. They came in, they were talking a lot of junk on social media beforehand, and they showed up, right, for a program that's very respectable. But you have to really give them credit for that 28-point explosion in the fourth quarter. That showed what the Bama brand is. It showed that they have fight and finish. And Jalen Milroe, still had 2 touchdowns, still was, relatively impressive. But I think I guess if you're watching the film, if me, not in a compromising position per se, would say clean up the penalties, clean up any sloppy play. Let's control the possession of the football. I think it was a Jam Williams had a fumble in the game. So those are some things that stood up to me when I watched the game.
Yeah, it's Jalen Milroe. I joked earlier about him being the best running back in the SEC, but he is tied for third in the SEC for rushing touchdowns right now. He had 2 in the air and 2 on the ground in that game. So the offense that Alabama is running is just so dependent on good O-line play.
Mm-hmm.
We know what he can do on the ground when he scrambles, but when he's a guy who senses pressure early in the pocket, he's not going to sit there and take the hit and deliver a pass across the middle of the field. Right as soon as that pocket collapses, he's out because he has the legs to do so. So in games where he's going to get hawked down, you're not going to be able to do that. And we saw USF shut down some of that early, bringing that pressure. And the O-line was just, I mentioned it with the penalties. We had 3 touchdowns called back from penalties. Right as soon as they got, Wilkin Formby out of there and put Elijah Pritchett on the line, 21 unanswered points right then. I can't say he's only the guy, but they all came up that right side and right tackle. So, with Caden Proctor out, the injuries on the O-line, a couple of transfers in, it is coming together slowly, but it better come together before week 5 against Georgia, or there's going to be some tough times for this offense behind that O-line.
Yeah, and you need to kind of come together here before week 3. And in Wisconsin, I want to say they're 1-1, and they haven't, or maybe they're 2-0, but they haven't looked tremendously impressive in some of these Mid-Atlantic Conference games they've been playing. But despite Caden Proctor being out, transfer tackle who was at Alabama, went to Iowa, came back. I'm going to correct myself. Jam Miller did look impressive, right? 140 yards, 1 touchdown. So it's just a matter of putting together for 4 quarters. They're kind of working to the kinks. I'd like to see more, maybe a little bit more run pass option when you have 2 capable running backs in the backfield. And like you said, potentially the best running back in the SEC in Jalen Milroe. Let's see him use it, right? If that's his strong suit, let's see them use it. Like, no one can stop him when he's coming downfield. And that's what Jalen Milroe does for your team, is that even if you ever feel like you're out of a game, his running abilities to be able to create a play on his own is what separates him from some of these other quarterbacks like a Quinn Ewers or like a Carson Beck, who are somewhat mobile, but they're not running at the same clip that Jalen Milroe is.
Yeah. You can tell that they started to develop the offense to build around that. But when other things aren't clicking, it's tough to get that going. We saw it. There's other games that we saw that in. Auburn, the pass game's not working. So if you go to the run too often, it's going to get shut. It gets shut down. It's hard to have a single pronged attack. So I think Alabama still needs to develop that intermediate passing. There were a lot of those deep balls that were, you see Ryan Williams in single coverage. He's still the leading receiver in 2 weeks with Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just toss it up and hope he can do what he does. And it works occasionally, but against teams where you're going to need sustained drives, 6 3 and outs isn't going to cut it. You're going to have to be able to build sustained drives. With Wisconsin next week, it will be a tough one. It'll be a tough test, but it's a doable test to build upon that. They're not going for an FCS opponent. They're going to be able to test some of these things out against a non-conference opponent who's not bad. Linebacker Justin Jefferson out for the very questionable targeting penalty. Funny, he had 20 snaps before the penalty and he had 10 tackles in those 20 snaps, which is pretty crazy. A high motor on a guy, but I'm looking forward to that game next week and hoping they can correct on some of this.
And hopefully so, right? And I feel like we focus a lot in this segment about the offense. We're so used to what Bryce Young was able to provide a couple of years ago and what we saw from Jalen Milroe as the season got on. And if you remember, it took about 5-6 weeks for him to get to where he needed to get to, and that was a byproduct of a lot of different factors. But the defense is still stout. Like I don't think they've given up more than 21 points all season. USF, Bynum Brown is a good quarterback. That team is going to compete for the AAC championship. And if they win that championship, they are going to be in that conversation for the playoff, right? They could very well potentially find themselves back at Bryant-Denny as a 12 seed, depending on where Alabama finishes. So that's not to cape for the performance, but that's a really good out of conference group of 5 team to play.
Yeah.
We'll see if they ever schedule them again, but that's a good one. So.
I hope not. Never schedule them again. They do have Alex Golesh, the former OC at Tennessee. I know you like to call it the Heupel disciple and all that, but they developed that passing offense that attacks the intermediates. They were able to bust out some big run plays. So Alabama has some good film to watch, some good things to develop upon. Better to have these tests now because there is that recency bias down the stretch. They lost to Texas last year, played USF sloppy, and then we're a couple bad snaps away from going to a national championship and playing against a bar. So it's not the end of the world. I know Alabama fans are expecting a lot, and they're expecting a coach who gets a little bit more fired up than that. But good things ahead. The game got put back together once the O-line was straightened out.
The second game that caught our attention, there was a couple teams that played Power 4 opponents in week 2, and that was Auburn, the other team in Alabama. Had the opportunity to play Cal in a rematch from last season. And, this game kind of left a lot of people from War Eagle Nation with some questions on what to think. I guess I could lead off with my thoughts. It was definitely not a great performance. You never want to see – you go from having a career game tying your all-time high in touchdowns for Peyton Thorne with 5 touchdowns to this game having 5 turnovers, 1 on the ground, 4 in the air. And it left a lot to think about from the quarterback position when you have weapons like Keandre Lambert and Cam Coleman. What were some of your thoughts from the game?
Yeah, you're spot on. Like Peyton Thorne played not well. And I know Auburn fans they're starting to kind of call for his job and figure out what that is. And Hugh Freeze is hearing those comments. And he mentioned, Hank Brown, the redshirt freshman, is going to get some snaps in practice this week. So he saw it too. I don't think everything was Peyton Thorne's fault. There were some O-line struggles. They had 4 different tackles taking snaps throughout the game. I don't think it's the end of the world for Auburn, but they looked bad. The offense couldn't get anything going, in any drive where they started to get some sustained forward momentum was killed by a turnover, and then you get 2 opportunities back at the end of the game on a short clock. And both of those are squandered with interceptions, both of which were bad. One was a miscommunication on a route, and one was just an awful underthrow to down the sideline there. So Auburn, your quarterback play can only go up, I guess, is the positive spin here, but that was a tough game to watch.
Yeah, and if you look at another positive spin there is the defense was able to keep him in the game. If you're just going off the stats alone, Fernando Mendoza, the quarterback for Cal, was 19 for 21 in the first half, finished the game with 2 touchdowns, 233 yards. But the defense was able to kind of contain Cal when needed. But you need to see more on the offense. You expect a lot from Jarquez Hunter at running back, if I'm saying that right. I think it's Jarquez Hunter. At running back, we only had 68 yards and 12 carries, and so it just didn't click, right? And that can come from the quarterback position. The quarterback's the leader of the offense, and that is where a lot of people from Auburn were calling for getting a second quarterback in the portal in the offseason. Hugh Freeze, which I think is very admirable, decided to roll with Peyton Thorne, and it's a completely different conversation this week talking about the team who played Alabama A&M versus the team that played Cal. You're not afforded these opportunities to. There's no one you're playing in the SEC where you have 5 turnovers and you only lose by a touchdown or 10 points. Yeah. And so that's gotta kind of have an overall rough feeling coming from that game.
And the score could have been a lot worse. It was 21-14. Cal missed 2 field goals. Auburn scored that late touchdown to try to get back in it. So for a period there, it could have been a lot worse. You play a team with a more high-powered offense than Cal, you are going to see more points on the board than that. Them rolling with Peyton Thorne this year, we mentioned it in the Alabama A&M game where they went with this RPO offense, but then they opted to throw so much, which was the right read against that team, but they weren't building upon any running game momentum going into this week. So when Jarquez Hunter finally gets out there, they don't have the ability to build the momentum there. Post this game, they mentioned for next week and weeks forward, they're going to simplify their playbook a little bit. They might have overestimated the quarterback IQ of Peyton Thorne and his ability to read defenses. So I think they're going to shrink that playbook a little bit from what Hugh Freeze is saying. Try to get back to the basics, split the offense a little bit more balance. There's positive things there. It didn't come from the quarterback play. It came from the defense. They're able to shut down Jaden Ott, less almost like 1 yard per carry. So they knew what they needed to do on defense and kept the game within reason. But I think they'll roll with Peyton Thorne for a while. It's a bad game, but the Cam Coleman tip for a pick, the one on the miscommunication, the one at the end of the game, the box score doesn't necessarily tell some of the drives that he was able to get going.
Yeah. And I think for Peyton Thorne, we're just always looking for him to put it together for a whole game. I would get Cam Coleman involved way more. I mean, he had 2 catches for 43 yards. We had that big 41-yard, beautiful ball thrown by Peyton Thorne to get them on the other side of the team's field, right? I would expect to see more coming from Cam in the next game against New Mexico to kind of prepare them for their game against Arkansas the following week in week 4 for their SEC debut from a game perspective.
And I think they'll come out with Hank Brown a little bit more early in the game. You usually see that backup quarterback come in when the game's well over, into the 4th. I think that they'll bring him out a little bit earlier because if it is an SEC play and they're getting something like this, where there's multiple interceptions and multiple turnovers, they want to at least know that they have a guy with experience who can run their playbook at the game speed. So hopefully that will help. You mentioned trying to get Cam Coleman involved more. It was just a tough stretch there for the middle half of the game. Second and third quarter, there was only Peyton Thorne was 2 for 6 for 15 yards, which is a terrible, spot to be in.
Absolutely. And so you look past this game, you have New Mexico, you have Arkansas, you have Oklahoma. I think I have Auburn winning those from my original projections. What do you think you need to see from the offense to feel more confident going to that next 3-game stretch?
I'm going to need to see them play a more balanced offensive game, like to be able to do both pass, run, create sustained drives, and keep things simple. No need to do too much from Peyton Thorne.
Absolutely. So Auburn Nation, you should feel good about that. This is an out of conference loss. You're still 1-1. You're undefeated in conference at 0-0. And there is a nice tune-up game before you head into playing Arkansas at home. So you've actually been able to stay home for the first 4 games and the first 5 games of the year.
Yeah, it's a good feeling, to be able to do that. So we're expecting better things from Auburn to come because it probably couldn't get much worse from a quarterback play standpoint.
And that was pretty rough.
We had a quarterback that we were excited to see coming into this week 2 matchup, and it was the matchup that was one of the bigger marquee ones this week at a neutral site, and that was Tennessee and NC State. Nico Iamaleava, 55-10. I don't think he played lights out stellar. There was opportunities for improvement, definitely, but man, what a statement.
Yeah, and that's what I think when you hear Nick Saban talk about him being potentially the best quarterback in the SEC, it's his ceiling seems so high because you're watching 2 games where they have put up over 50 points, and you're still wondering, like, well, Nico's got more. He could polish up his play on the ground. He could, not throw an interception. There's opportunities to kind of throw the ball deep where he's showing he can throw at all 3 levels, short, medium, and deep. And so I'm very impressed with Tennessee. That's why they're number 4 in my power rankings. That's why they're in that first tier for your power rankings above Ole Miss. And so, like I said, I was overall impressed. You obviously want to see him kind of clean up some of the turnovers. This was his first Power 4 opponent in the regular season ever. He's played 3 games, right? Fully through, including the bowl game against Iowa last year. But the real story, it should be Dylan Sampson.
Yeah.
He is leading the SEC in rushing. He's averaging, I think, a little bit over 4 yards per carry. And he is just, I think he's unstoppable when it comes to big runs. He has a spin move. He can cut through players. And so he's going to be a key player both in the air and on the ground, as we saw with 130 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns this last game.
Yeah, and running for Tennessee is huge. On the offense, the SEC leader Dylan Sampson, and then on the other side of the ball, their rush defense is lights out. They're only allowing 113 yards through 2 games. Most teams let that up in a single game. And this is against NC State too, which isn't, they're not playing FCS opponents or Group of 5 opponents. So the defense is stout. They're able to shut it down. They have the DBs to shut down the pass game. They can bring pressure. Grayson McCall had a tough day out there. But we do want to see a little bit more, we do want to see Nico's turnovers cleaned up. He had the one interception and then the other one in the face of pressure, which usually when a quarterback's pressured, there's a little bit of a leeway when the arm gets hit to leave an interception. But this wasn't coming from the backside. This was a front side pressure that to be an experienced quarterback, you need to know what to do there, and you can't throw that ball in that position. All of NC State's points came off of turnovers. The 3 that they got from the interception return that gave them the field goal, they had the pick 6. So if you're in a game where you can't put up 55, you don't want to be giving up 10 points from your offensive side when your defense is doing such a good job of shutting them down.
Absolutely. And Hunter, is it too early to say it feels like 95 yet for the Tennessee Volunteers? What would you need to see to kind of instill that championship feeling that aligns to your current power rankings?
I don't think there's anything in particular because they look good on both sides of the ball. Like the offense is firing well enough to keep up with the mistakes that they made. So I can't say, they have some tests coming up. I think Arkansas now is that test. We mentioned it earlier that Arkansas is now a test on people's schedule. They have to play in Arkansas. They'll play in Oklahoma as well before that. So they have 2 road tests coming up that I'll need to see the same consistency. But, it sounds simple, but this is a Tennessee team that puts players in positions to move the chains. You win the game. You win the game by getting first downs and moving the ball. But they know what Nico can do, and they have routes that break where he can put balls 10, 15 yards down the field. Those slants, you've seen them break for a run after catch. It looks kind of like a Tua offense. So I think that they have that in them. I'm just trying to find, I guess I'm more than trying to find something negative about them, I guess, with the turnovers, but they showed that in the face of that, they're still fine.
Yeah, they've looked very impressive. I think, if you're a Tennessee fan, you've probably been able to watch these last 2 games, very cozy, beer in hand or, water in hand or whatever you drink. And you were never stressed, right? I think, like I said, the 41-14 gap when it comes to scoring between the second and the fourth quarter against NC State, a ranked opponent. We'll see where they rank at the end of the season, but nonetheless, neutral site. That's got to speak for something. It does. It's why we have them so high. It's why out of the top 5 teams in both of our power rankings, they're the only one that features a quote unquote rookie quarterback who is in the conversation for being potentially the best quarterback in the SEC, and he's only a true sophomore. Right.
Yeah.
The test against Oklahoma will be fun. Josh Heupel, of course, is an alum of Oklahoma, played quarterback there, and he gets to return back to Norman to see what he can do. And that's when the real tests come, right? This is like syllabus week. No shade to NC State. We saw what they did against Western Carolina. If you watch that, very close game. I think they won by 8. But it's going to get real when it comes to Oklahoma and potentially Arkansas. And, then they got Bama two weeks later, right? So plenty of opportunities to take that test. And right now, we both have them kind of high in this power ranking. So very impressed. Should be very happy, Vol Nation. You're getting closer to that 95 feeling. And, Kent State should be easy work here for you coming up on Saturday.
The biggest pressure on a quarterback this week came from the South Carolina Gamecocks, and they made, someone one of the guys on the broadcast was like, man, I feel bad for Brock Vandagriff right now. And I couldn't have agreed more. I felt bad for him. Bad day in Kentucky for him.
Yeah, it wasn't a great day. And I think a lot of people were hitting the snake pose in Kroger Field where you're just like, what is happening? This can't be real life, right? You're coming off of a Southern Miss win. The game ended early, but you were taking it to them for 3 quarters. And this is the prime time slot, 3:30 p.m. And Kentucky fans have found themselves in this position the last couple of years where the spotlight is on them, and the Mark Stoops prepared teams have not shown up. At the end of the day, Stoops is not on the field, but he is preparing these players. And the main glaring gap, and we talked about it in the power rankings, was the O-line, right? Mm-hmm. You have a ton of skill at receiver. The running back is still able to get some good production, from what I watched, and the defense just didn't have an opportunity to catch a breath to really get stops, right?
Yeah.
And so this one, it's less about what Kentucky did; it's more about what South Carolina did.
Yeah.
Is Beamer ball like Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech? Obviously, Frank Beamer had a very historic career, but sometimes you never knew what you're going to get from Virginia Tech, and it feels this way in South Carolina. But you know what you're going to get. You know what you got on Saturday as a 31-6 slopping of Kentucky, dominant to your point on the defensive line side. Lenore Sellers still leaves room for more improvement. We got to see Roddy Ashford come in. Hunter, you spoke on it. I'm sure Auburn would have loved to see Roddy on their team this past week, given what he was able to kind of do on the field offensively and shake up, offering that veteran presence and that run pass option that he does with his feet. But South Carolina showed me something. They really showed me that they can show up, hold their own against what are supposed to be good SEC teams, and they have some strong weapons on the defensive side.
They definitely do, and they shut down everything on both sides of the ball. Kentucky was hoping that they could maybe bail out some of this with the rushing game. Couldn't really get it going there either. That was the only way that they were able to move the ball. But of the 12 drives that they had, only 3 had more than 6 plays in it because South Carolina shut it down. They couldn't get third down conversions. Only 21% conversion on third down. So South Carolina was swarming. They would snap the ball. Vandergrift was under pressure right away.
Yeah.
We do want to see more from Lenora Sellers because of the poor play from Kentucky. They ended up in decent field position a couple of times. We did have some quarterbacks swapping out with the injury there to Sellers that he came back from. But I think South Carolina, I put them at one of those teams that if they could put it all together, they'd be great. That's going to come from the offense. The defense is very put together right now. Even week 1 against Old Dominion, they did give up 19 points. Here, no touchdowns, 2 field goals. The offense, if they can perform, they're going to be a bright spot in the SEC. I don't know if they have that week in and week out or if it was just Kentucky playing bad, but Kentucky has such a great defense that South Carolina played just fine against.
Yeah, and I think your point around Lenore Sellers is very fair, right? He had 1 interception. He put 2 balls on the ground again. And the defense, similar to last week, where they were able to get 2 fumble recoveries to put them in the red zone to score against Old Dominion, came as the savior in this game. And you can do that in some of these games, but you're going to need offense. As the point I keep making, you're going to need offense to kind of get into that tier 1, tier 2 category that at a minimum, I'm sure, fans of Columbia want to see them in that tier 3 and up category when it comes to evaluating what Beamer is doing down there in Columbia. And they have a really big test this week with LSU. College Game Day will be on site. I think that's a perfect second game. I feel like their schedule is just like really warming them up to get stronger. They don't always play LSU every year. As we always say, LSU is SEC West and South Carolina is SEC East, but both these teams are, you're trying to figure out like what can we do? Like, are we going to get the offense going properly for this game? And do we believe our defense is just as good as USC's, or if not better? Which I think it's shown it has the potential to be, and the opportunity for them to try to stop Garrett Nussmeier and team over there in Columbia.
Yeah, they're going to have a tough test with Nussmeier and trying to stop that. We saw Nick Emanori up for South Carolina get the pick 6 there, so we know that they can jump some of these routes. I hope that they can get the same pressure on Nussmeier, for a good game, because if not, we've seen what he can do if able to sit in the pocket like he was against South Carolina or USC, South California. So a good week next week. Kentucky, on the other hand, will have a tough test with UGA. No shortage of pressure on a quarterback there. But it was a good start to the opening for SEC play.
Yeah, you would think Brock Vandergrift would be pretty familiar with what he's seeing on the other side, playing for Georgia in practice. And for USC, their next 4 to 5 games are quite the slate, right? I'm looking at the schedule right in front of me. It's like you got LSU next week, you got Akron, which is a bye game, and then you got a bye week. Then you have Ole Miss, Bama, Oklahoma. So celebrate this win right now. Kentucky's a great win. You should feel good being 1-0 in SEC play. I think if you look at the standings, you're actually in first place right now. So if you stop the count, you won the SEC. But that's not how it works. So hopefully you come out with LSU strong, you beat Akron potentially. Now you're sitting at 4-0. People aren't really looking at what you did against Old Dominion. They're looking at potentially 4-0. So there's a lot to be positive about, and there's really was despite looking at the offensive side, mostly, if not all positives coming out with a win and seeing what that defense can do. And that's going to keep that team in a lot of games. We just need to see more on the offensive side. Like if you're not going to get that quarterback performance you want, you can't turn the ball over. Giving the ball to their team is just not going to do it when it comes to interceptions, and fumbles, whether they're recovered or not, do affect the momentum in the game.
Yeah, they do. It'll be a good learning experience for these two teams, and then where you go from here. South Carolina building off of it, Kentucky trying to completely turn it around. In the most exciting game of the week, if you're just a football fan and you don't have a dog in the fight and you just want to watch a good game, you love overtime, you love good quarterback play. If you like that, you probably like high offenses. So 600 plus yards, almost 1,000, I think 1,000 in the game, over 1,000 in the game. Arkansas and Oklahoma State was a huge one. We're super high on Arkansas, and they kind of beat themselves in this game from where I'm looking at it.
That's what it looks like, right? They were able to get up to a two score advantage early on, and not to repeat what I said during the power rankings, but Taylor Green has been very impressive. He's second in the SEC in yards at 645 yards. He's shown that he can play both on the ground and in the air. I would argue he's the second most impressive running quarterback in the conference behind Jalen Milroe. Jackson Dart and Nico can certainly hold their own, but they're primarily more on the passing side compared to Taylor Green. You saw multiple 15-plus yard runs. And on the defense, you're equipped with a Travis Williams-led defense that was able to slow down Ollie Gordon for a little bit. And so where I felt concerned in this game was when the interception happened that Oklahoma State took back for a touchdown. And it just felt like when they got to overtime, it was like, we can pull this out. We've seen Sam Pittman in this situation before. And although the win column did not go the way they wanted, you left that game feeling impressed that we have some dogs here. We got some guys who can ball, both on both sides of the ball. And so it left a lot to be asked for from Blue Pig Suey Nation.
Well, you just want them to clean up a little bit of the problems that lost them the game. They were in the driver's seat, and then you throw a pick six and completely change the momentum. But down the stretch, Taylor Green mishandled a couple fumbles a couple snaps that he was able to contain, a little bit of sloppy play. They had the 2 fumbles, the pick six. But down near the end of the game, it all fell apart. They started to feel that pressure. They had, those 2 PIs on the last drive that Oklahoma State was able to score on. They missed a field goal in the first overtime. And then in the second overtime, you've been bottling Ollie Gordon up all game, but then you commit a personal foul to put him right within scoring range. I just can't feel like they shot themselves in the foot and lost the game. Sam Pittman is now 3-10 in 1-score games. So are you creating a culture in building a team that's able to withstand controversy and withstand the pressure that comes as a result of this? So I don't know. Is Sam Pittman the guy there long term if he can't win these close games? Because there's going to be a lot of them.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of them if you want to get to your goal of an SEC championship appearance, 10-win season, right? Like, when was the last time Arkansas had a 10-win season? Are we talking the Ryan Mallett era? Are we, going even further back? KJ Jefferson obviously had some good seasons, and he's now in UCF. But to your point, that the 3-10 record in 1-score games is concerning, especially when you look at the coaches you have on staff with Bobby Petrino, former head coach for Arkansas, former head coach at Louisville, and Travis Williams, who's an up-and-coming coordinator we don't know how long he's going to be there. That's a guy that could easily get a good group of 5 head coaching job. He could get a higher paying defensive coordinator position. And I don't know Travis personally. I'm sure he feels a lot of affiliation with the players, but this is a business, right? And so you love to see him put together and win. Everything's always great when you win, right? And if I'm an Arkansas fan, I would feel really good knowing that our offenses looked impressive these last 2 games. You were able to hang and should have won a game. But when you watch those types of games and you should have won, you start to look at the coaching, like you said, where it's not a matter of we have talent. We had the talent. We were winning. We're controlling the game. What can we fix?
Yeah,
coaching decisions, the chemistry that could potentially create, and just kind of cleaning up some of the turnovers on that side. So Arkansas, for both of our power rankings, has an opportunity to play 2 teams that are lower in them in A&M and in Auburn over the next couple of weeks after kind of getting through UAB in week 3. So we'll see where they go from here. But that was hands down the most entertaining game of the week from the SEC. Of course, we had close games with Houston and Oklahoma, but from an offensive explosion, the colors were beautiful. Seeing orange for Oklahoma State and seeing that dark red for Arkansas. Certainly one of the best games of the weekend, and a lot to look forward to from Razorback Nation.
Yeah, I mean, 685 or 648 yards to 385. You hate to lose a game when you're almost got 300 yards more, and it came as a result of some of those sloppy things that they can easily clean up. We saw the athleticism. Travis Williams, not giving up any points on the defense in the first half. We've seen what the offense can do, under Bobby Petrino. They got the ballers there, 55-second drill at the end of the game. They needed, 55 seconds to go down. We need a field goal, and Taylor Green did it. You just have to clean it up. But you mentioned, they have that a couple of those tough games ahead of them, but they have those not tune-up games, but I want to say they have those games against inferior SEC opponents that you mentioned. But Arkansas also plays Tennessee. They play Texas. They play Ole Miss. Like, they're going to have some tough games, but if they can win one of those, I wouldn't count them out in any game in the SEC right now because of the offense that they have, that they can put up points to keep up with some of the defensive mishaps that happen later on in the game. Because I think that was a momentum thing, not a lapse in defense from a skill standpoint.
100%. And I think that's where this pressure comes on Sam, because you watch them year in and year out, and they're in these games with an Ole Miss, or they're in these games with a team that on paper should be better, but you see the talent that Arkansas has, and you're in it and you're not winning it. So it's like, if this was Kentucky, you're happy to be in those games, and you understand where your ceiling is. You understand you're a basketball school in some ways, right? You obviously have the potential, and you've shown to beat Florida and Tennessee. But Arkansas has this pretty storied history when it comes to football. They are primarily a football school. Obviously, things are different with John Calipari at basketball now and being there, but they're expecting this program to be an 8, 9, 10 win team. You see them in those games, like we talked about, if they're close with Alabama, which they were. I think they were close last year. If you're close with Ole Miss, close in your 4th, 5th, 6th season with this team is not going to get it done for Sam. And so it's kind of this. You almost should feel good about how the team looks, but there's a storm cloud of, all right, we got to win for you to be here, and you don't have that same luxury of the games being close. Similar to like Florida, where if these games are close and you're losing, your schedule's so strong. All right, we'll give you the nod here, Billy. It's your 3rd year. Sam's been here for a while. He's played some close games. He's gone through 3 different quarterbacks now, so we need to see a little bit more. But positively speaking, should be very impressed with the program. Should be impressed with that loss. And there's a lot to build on as you kind of are able to slowly transition into the depths of the SEC schedule, as you mentioned, with those tougher opponents, and starting off with Auburn and Texas A&M.
Yeah, both of those are winnable games. So I'm looking forward to this Arkansas team and that high-powered offense that they've been able to build there.
Yeah. So the last team that we want to talk about, and it almost seems crazy because it was the only top 10 matchup of the week, is Texas. They say no story is a story, right? And this game is our 6th story after the power rankings, because it was a snooze fest. And that's what you want if you're Steve Sarkisian at head coach, right? Quinn Ewers did what he does, 3 touchdowns, 246 yards. You got every receiver involved. Matthew Golden got a touchdown. Gunnar Blue got a touchdown. It was just a party in the big house. If you watch the game, the 4th quarter, the stands were half filled. And it wasn't because it was cold in Michigan. There was just nothing to be excited about.
Yeah, they went with this approach on offense to bring a pocket passing quarterback in. We saw them this week try to bring in at Michigan. They try to bring in 2 quarterbacks and use them both. They went with Davis Warren, thinking that this was a Michigan team that was going to be able to get the run going. It is not, and it is not a team that is able to get the pass going. Davis Warren, on paper, looks like he might have done okay. He had a couple of completions here and there, but overthrowing his receivers, making the wrong reads. They were unable to move the ball against Texas. Texas was able to do what they do and get their playmakers involved. And, with the tight end position and Gunnar Helm, what Texas needs to do in the future, we can see in that game, they're still trying to figure out the running game after being on RB3 and below, with the 2 running back injuries out right now. So if they can figure that out, they've really wrapped up a perfect package. But it's hard to say anything about Texas right now when they went in there and defeated the national champions in their own house, like it was an FCS team.
Like they were in Darrell K. Royal Stadium. That's what it looked like. And if you look at, they shut down their best players, like you said, right? Donovan Edwards was second-hand man to Blake Corum at running back. He only had 41 yards. I think he's sitting at less than 100 yards for the season. I'm sure he does a lot more than that in college football 25, being one of the cover man. And alongside him was Quinn Ewers, of course, on the cover, who balled out. Colston Loveland, he had a good game, 70 yards, but that's their best receiver, tight end. He's going to be a first-round pick. They were able to force him to fumble. Texas just has this different energy. Like a lot of people in Austin are afraid to say the dreaded 3 words, Texas is back, but they look to be back, right? There's a debate to be had if they were going to be the number 1 team in the power rankings, and I think you heard my explanation earlier. If you listen to it, I do believe Clemson looks better than Michigan, but I also got to give credit for Texas to making Michigan look so bad, right? Yeah. The Fresno State game kind of dilutes what you think about Michigan, but that performance, I mean, there was no chemistry. There was nothing going on well for Michigan. It was I don't even think they scored a touchdown, right? 2 field goals in the second, third quarter, 6 points in the fourth quarter. Michigan fans are thinking like, okay, well, there's no Rose Bowl necessarily this year because it's a 12-team playoff. Like, where are we going to end up at? Is they got a quarterback controversy? They got a running back who's not showing up. Yeah. Defense is still good. That's going to be their thing. But Texas just kind of raised a lot of red flags for them, and that speaks more to who Texas is as a program and what Sarkisian has done there, and versus what Michigan looks like.
Yeah, and if you watched our preview of this game, the big piece that Michigan was going to have to focus on was on the defensive side of the ball. That's where they have the weapons. They have 2 of the best players in the country. They're able to get good pressure on a quarterback, and it just didn't work. Like that was what we were hoping. Well, no, I wasn't hoping to see from them, but what you want to see from a Michigan team is being able to get that pressure. I mean, Colorado State was still able to pick off Ewers by creating pressure and getting the tip on the interception from him. Michigan couldn't get there to him. So when Texas plays other teams throughout the year that have a considerably less aggressive pass rush, defensive presence than Michigan does, they're going to be just fine. I mean, we didn't put too much weight into what they did against Colorado State. Now we can against Michigan. Yeah,
and they got a cool little schedule kind of coming up here, right? You got UTSA next week. Wouldn't sleep on them. Those are the games that could sneak up on you. But you got UTSA next week. You're, in-state school affiliate, right? All the funding is coming from UT. You got UL Monroe the following week, so you're playing General Booty, best name in college football. Then you got Mississippi State, right? Should be a good one. That'll be in Austin as well, so that'll be their first SEC game at home, first one ever in Darrell K. Royal. And then you got Oklahoma, second weekend, I think in October or first week in October, right around ACL, Austin City Limits for your Austin residents. But you got to feel good about that Michigan one. That was one that you were like, okay, let's get through this. I think it felt a lot better as a Texas fan going into it after seeing what you did against Colorado State. And now I'm not saying you take your foot off the gas, but this is an opportunity to just kind of stack up good wins. You put up 30, 40 points a game, and Texas is often running.
Yeah. It's a Texas team that had, you mentioned Clemson, it looks good, but really you could put Texas at 1, Georgia at 2. Like this Texas team looks solid, and their path to the playoffs is solid as well. Like they're a team to beat. So I'm looking forward to what this Texas team does. Looking forward to what really all these teams that we talked about today continue to do. We're still early in the season. A lot of teams haven't built enough of a resume to have a full solid opinion on them, right? Like we're going to get to see some more teams this week. Alabama will play their first, Power 4 team, for example. We're going to see South Carolina take another SEC game with LSU. So we have a lot to talk about in our next episode.
Yeah, and so it's going to be a really fun next episode. As Hunter mentioned, we'll pick the new SEC game of the week. We'll talk about all the important matchups coming up this week, and any big news stories that are coming into the season. We'll make sure we cover in our preview episode for Week 3. So thank you for tuning in. This is a new SEC podcast. If there's anything you want to see here, any teams you want us to cover more, any teams you want us to show love or hate towards, let us know. We're having fun. Like I said, it's always a party in the South, and the SEC is one of the best parties out there. So thanks, y'all, and have a good one.